being recorded.
With the INCOSE Requirements Working Group. So again, there is a Requirements Working Group at Sandia. This is a different one. This is at the INCOSE level. And we have people from all types of industries, all large and small companies, government, national lab, but also commercial. And we're going to dive right in here. All right, thank you. And okay, it should be coming through. Looks like it is.
We can see it just fine, Raymond. Thank you.
All right. Let's jump into what problem we're trying to solve. Now, a lot of people, a lot of engineers in your experience, maybe we all have our own impression of what verification and validation is. So the issue is sometimes our vocabulary drifts, or we call different things different items. Excuse me. Verification means one thing, validation is something else. So we're trying to solve what is really a gap on fairly low-level guidance on how to perform, this step in the systems engineering V. Now, for a simple item, let's say a coffee maker, this might not be that big a deal, but we're talking about how do we do this for larger programs or for requirements that are functional, but also have environmental caveats. And so somehow it's a non-trivial effort to manage all this. So what we did, we basically, since the International Symposium of 2019, July of 19, coming up on 2 years ago, we decided we need to really create some documentation that not only has a background and theory and some ideas and defines terms, but also some documents that are accessible to entry-level, mid-level practitioners. Engineer, perhaps fresh out of school, he or she is wondering, all right, I'm the V&V lead. What does that mean, and how do I start? So we're hoping this contribution will close that gap. Now, the Requirements Working Group is currently chaired by Tammy Katz. She is back at Ball Aerospace at this point. She's many decades in the systems engineering field. I think she recently finished her PhD work in systems engineering from Colorado State. So she has a lot of experience. And the Lou Wheatcraft is also one of the major authors of this PERC, these documents. He was the previous chair of the working group. So the point there is that there's a lot of people who have been around INCOSE a while, but also been around systems engineering a while. There's also a host of other authors, co-authors, leads. Right? I'm one of the document leads. And not to fear, what we're writing is going to be aligned with current existing products. Right now, there's a guide to writing requirements that's available from the INCOSE store. Non-members, it's a fee. It may be free to full members. I'd have to check. But that's been around for a couple of years. We'll talk. Everything's going to align. That's the bottom line. Now, first, we'll describe the current state. We'll talk about that guide to writing requirements. Then it'll be useful just to describe how we came up with actually 3 documents that we're releasing, how that came about, and then that will lay sort of what each document's role is. But more than cranking out some useful guides, in creating all this material, we realized that to put it all together, we're encouraging a small shift, what may be a shift in people's thinking on how systems engineering works. What that might look like is there could be some vocabulary that looks new, but it's really not. But the part of this is just laying out our view of just how systems engineering works. Now, all that is compatible with the systems engineering handbook, but it's never been codified in one place, at least not to this level of detail. We'll briefly talk to some schedule, and then to wrap up, I'll just show a little bit of the outline for the document. Now, it's still in draft, but This outline is reasonably firm, certainly subject to change, but that'll give a picture of what the guide to V&V does versus some of the other documents. So we'll wrap up with some YouTube videos, actually, for some training that the interested people can take a look at. Lou Wheatcraft in particular has given this similar presentations to a lot of different chapters. The recordings, I think, really cover more of the systems engineering approach that we use. Now, a lot of guidance does exist today, and it's not just the Guide for Writing Requirements that's at the bottom, but there's, of course, the INCOSE Systems Engineering Handbook. That is accompanied by another item called the Systems Engineering Body of Knowledge, and that is as I've experienced it, it's a web page. It almost has a Wikipedia feel, and it just goes through different topics. It's curated by someone. Was curated by Nicole Hutchinson, who is associated with INCOSE. So there's this interplay between INCOSE and what they call the CBOC as far as content. So these exist today. A lot of people use them. There's a lot of great knowledge in all three of these. We need a deep dive into the guide to writing requirements, because that's the one item that exists at a working guide level. Started years ago, again through the requirements working group, and we're up to version 3.0, just not last July, but the one before. That's well used. A lot of people like it. It has a lot of background, a lot of theory, but then also a lot of detail on attributes and other content. So if you had to write requirements and were new to crafting the statements, doing a needs analysis, this would be the document that's out there now that we would recommend reading. That will at least give you the background and the basics, and also some process steps on, okay, well, how do I start? It fortunately covers requirement sets as well, so sets of requirements, and talks a little bit about eliciting needs. And one of the motivations, though, for these documents was that we felt needs were a little underrepresented. Just eliciting needs, going to the customer. Perhaps think of an experience you've had where you worked hard, you thought you knew what the customer wanted, and sure enough, it's this classic "bring me another rock" exercise. That's not what I meant. Or now that I see it, I know I don't like it. That could be expensive, and then sometimes it's back to the drawing board. So, how to avoid that? We felt that the guide to writing requirements didn't really pass, and that's part of the gap set we're trying to fill. Now, at first, this started out as two new guides, and if you'll see in the image, the yellow blocks at the top are the sort of the capstone documents, high level, the Systems Engineering Handbook and the CBOC. Below, the green is the new, and then the blue is what exists. So the guide for writing requirements, that on the far left, that exists, and then the two other guides down on the center and lower right, that's what's new. So there are two documents. One is the guide to developing and managing requirements. A colleague of mine is working on that one, Kevin Orr and Tammy Katz, they're working there. Then the guide to V&V. So this was all going well, but somehow there still felt like there was something missing here. And how we knew that is when we started going to different authors to write this section and that section. All of a sudden, these guides were 150 pages apiece. Well, that's just too much for a guide. We're hoping the guides would be about 50 pages. Now, the answer we came up with was to come up with our own manual. We called it the Needs and Requirements Lifecycle Manual. That was the one where that would have the background theory. That would be the why behind the how. We would not have a page limit on that. We'd really want to put our collective knowledge into that document. So then at the end, we wind up with this. So we've, again, as you recognize, the Systems Engineering Handbook and the CBOK, they feed this manual, which describes end-to-end, really the whole systems engineering process. Again, from needs down to V&V and system approval. From there, we can hang the guides on. So now we've got the guide for writing requirements, which exists. We're going to retool that because some of the material from there is going to move to these other guides. Then we've got the two guides for developing and managing requirements, and then the guide to V&V. Now, the advantage with this model is that we can have other guides as well. In fact, at the last international workshop, we talked with the System Security Working Group, and there's a Social Systems Working Group that we're talking with. So we can apply and basically implementation guide for requirements management, ease elicitation, V&V, two different specialties. Again, social systems or security, and have a tailored guide, but based on the same fundamentals. Now, you notice something new here. If you go to the far left, it's a existing INCOSE white paper, and it's integrated data as a foundation of systems engineering. Now, one of the things we came across and maybe you've come across in your projects, where if you're dealing with requirements and then V&V data, and then you're trying to manage all that, all of a sudden we move to managing this in a tool, or do we use a certain tool? What's our ground truth? What's our ground truth? What's our data repository? And things can devolve pretty quickly if there's not just some data strategy or some integrated data set that we can all pivot off of. Particularly if we're going to more of a model-based environment or digital engineering environment. My own experience discuss integrated data, common source of truth, one repository of ground truth, for being the core of just doing the systems engineering that we're used to. So that's in the background. That paper is by Lou Wheatcraft, who is also involved in he's the document lead for the needs and requirements manual. All right, so that is the background of just how all the pieces work, which is just a little bit more of a theoretical angle. And we're trying to shift to a different vocabulary. But it's not something you haven't seen, but we found with different authors' contributions, they would call the same artifacts we're used to, just different things. So how we've consider this a background slide, even a vocabulary slide. When we talk about ConOps or goals or mission needs or operational interests or operational flow, we're calling that the integrated set of system needs. And these needs could come from anywhere. Business practices, corporate guidance, directly from the customer users, even financial stakeholders. Now, requirements can mean a lot of different things. How we're calling requirements is the set of shall statements that a designer will receive and use as input to their own design processes. Design input requirements for short. So it's the input. Think of a black box where it's not a product, it's the actual process of design. You can have input requirements on the left side, the designing works, and then on the output of the design, we get the design itself. What we're calling the design is really design output specifications. So if we have design input requirements, the designers do their thing, and then they produce design output specs. That language, we've worked hard to be consistent throughout the needs manual and then all the guides that we have. Now, we haven't built a product yet. Once we have the design output specifications, now we can actually build something to that. We can either cut metal or for software, we can start coding. Now, for most software products, we've already started coding, but this does not preclude having different drafts or different revisions or even different prototype builds as we go along. But the actual item, a physical item or a piece of software, we're calling that the system of interest. Now, in some companies have systems, subsystems, components. This basic approach does apply to different levels. For the manual and guide, we tend to emphasize system because component level work tends to be a subset, but the ideas are the same. So a piece part would be considered either a system or a SOI. The other idea that we developed, and we try to borrow from systems theory here, is that going from one stage to the next, we got an image coming up here. As you go from needs to requirements, okay, in a way that's a transformation. We're transferring one set of statements to a different set. And then requirements to design. All right, well, that's another transformation. We're trying to introduce this idea of moving from one stage to the next in a system. Transforming from requirements to design, and then you transform design into a realized part. Again, these are concepts many of you have seen. We just needed to standardize our vocabulary, but also get the detailed vocabulary to where there was less ambiguity about what we were talking about. Now, if we go back to the systems V, let's get a picture of where all this fits in. We'll be able to grasp it all soon. Systems V is still valid. We did a model where we take the V and the way we stretch it out. We sort of bend it out into a straight line, reading from left to right. And then that opened up where we can show how the requirements and then the V and V comes into the process. Okay, this V you may recognize the System Engineering Handbook. We've added to it a little bit. But again, moving from left to right, we start out with needs. Going down the left side, there's more requirements, and then we allocate, do the design. Again, we're transforming requirements into a set of buildable output specs. Then we start building, and then we go up the right side. And you'll see the V and V on the red lines that are horizontal. As we're going up the right, we verify and validate against its corresponding part on the left. Now, one aspect, it's not shown on this drawing, but one aspect we're also trying to share with the community is to not wait until the right side of the V to start verifying or validating. If we can validate maybe with a systems model or some kind of modeling software, even an MBSE tool, as we're allocating, as we're creating requirements, then we catch defects earlier and save money downstream. So this model doesn't preclude early V and V, nor does our main one, which leads us to our main model. So this, we'll take a little time walking through this. This is our capstone visual. Well, this is that top row reading from left to right. It's basically the systems V. We start with missions and goals and needs, get this integrated set. We move on to create our requirements. We're calling them design input requirements. Then at this point, even before we're starting the design, ideally, if you notice the yellow arrow going back to the left, that's requirements validation coming out the top. We can start doing validation basically real time. Okay, we have requirements. Let's look at them. Let's validate them against the needs. Would a system that satisfied these requirements, if that existed, would that solve the real problem? Now, what might appear novel with this scheme is that if from the bottom we're blending in, as you see, organizational guidance. So you may work in an organization that has specific, if not policy, then best practice documents. Sometimes they're called design guides. They also drive the creation of these requirements. And then there's a feedback loop between, looking at our requirements, is crafting these. Did we craft those in a way that's in line with some of this corporate guidance? Or even if we work in a large program, we might have program-specific guidance. So those are the arrows that go down and then back up. Now, we introduced a term called requirements verification. And when I first saw that term, I figured, oh, we do tests and we verify that, the requirements are met. Our product, we built this product, we verify our requirements are met, and we have this test evidence. We introduce a different way to look at that. So when we say requirements verification, in this particular instance, we're verifying the requirements are written correctly, they're clear, and they follow guidance based on our guide to writing requirements. Concepts like, is there only one requirement specified? Is there only one concept? Does it have a subject and a verb? Is it clear what it is? If it's not testable, is there a very good reason why it isn't testable? So how about the syntax? Can we do some structural analysis on the sentence itself? Are there some flaws there, some vagueness that we want to author out? So it's the verifying of the requirement statement. That's that step. It's in the lower left there. Now, if we go back to the top row and we're moved from design input requirements, which we now have, we've validated that they're going to give us the right system, and we verified them more as a quality check on the actual statements. We've done all that. Now we're ready to transform over to the design. So the engineers do their thing. Their organizational, perhaps design guidance that gets folded in. That's at the direct center at the bottom. That'll fold up. And then from there, we have build the print specs. Here's the print of what we need to build. Here's the material, or here is the logic flow diagram of the software we need to build. We're ready to start coding. We're ready to cut metal. But engineers, in my experience, we love to do that. We love to get in there and start cutting metal. Start printing up circuit boards. That will lead to design output specifications. So those are that. We're now ready to do production, and as we move from the center off to the right, now it's our production floor or our coding shop. Here quality control can come in. How do we manufacture? Okay, well, we have our CAD drawings. We give it to the machines to mill, and then now we're starting to create parts. We have a pick and place machine, perhaps for our circuit boards, and or again a coding shop. Once again, we might have organizational or program requirements on production. Those fold in from the bottom up there to the top. Then now we have our system of interest. So now, if we talk V&V, we can do a validation of the system that's already built. That's at the top. The yellow goes from system interest, and we cross-check that back with the original missions and goals. For system verification, now we need to ask which type. Okay, are we verifying that perhaps we designed it correctly? There are ways to do that without cutting metal yet. Maybe there's some simulations. And then for production verification, did we build it? So the, again, quality assessment, quality control. These guys don't get into manufacturing quality, but this is where we touch that space. Now, we still do our traditional quote-unquote requirements verification. Okay? We gather evidence that our built system of interest, okay, we run tests, we get data, we maybe do Halt and Haas testing, and then that is used in our V&V approach. We still do that. This diagram, the intent is just to fan it out, just to break it up into different pieces, so that with a given test, we know right where it slots in. Okay, are we verifying the design is correct? Are we doing a cross-check on the requirements, perhaps? Or we have the product in hand and we need to take it back to the customer and do some operational testing. Now, at this point, I do want to open up for questions. There's a lot here. Any thoughts or questions on this one?
Hey, Ray,
Okay, we should have a little time at the end as well. Yes,
yeah.
please.
Yeah. This kind of harks back also to slide 18, but in terms of, I like the notion of depicting the transformation of requirements into, specifications that you show here. What about requirements related to life cycle phases, for example? Like there might be some operational, O&M requirements, disposal requirements. Would you see adding those kinds of concepts in this figure?
Oh, thanks, Ann. No, that's a good question. They are still in the background, so they, like particularly disposal. Okay, well that would be like a mission level requirement, almost like a business level requirement. They would still be in the orange box on the upper left. That might not drive. Yeah, it's there. So that would still fold into this process. It might not. Actually, that could determine choice of material. Over a different alloy of steel, or maybe there are different materials that we're shying away from, lead perhaps. Maybe there's a requirement to not use lead solder. So this could still include programmatic requirements like that. No hazardous lead to be used, and then that once the system came out at the end of the right, now it would be validation time. Part of the system validation would be, okay, what's the disposal plan? We looked at that. Oh, all right, well, we avoided lead solder, so we passed that. Matter of fact, some of the driver of this fanned out architecture, I know it seems perhaps overly complex at first, is to sort of have a home for these other requirements that don't necessarily relate to function or performance.
Okay, well, thank you, Raymond. Thanks for the clarification.
Sure. Okay, any others before we jump off? That was good. All right, thank you. Okay, now we're going to fan out one of the boxes. So we have system needs on the left, and then it ties back into these life cycle concepts. And so thank you for queuing this one up. These are really two different types of needs. One is maybe more functional. What's a KPP, key performance parameter? And then for life cycle, not just concept of operations, how's it going to fit into the customer ecosystem, but again, stuff like disposal. So jumping back, if you look at this orange box in the upper left, we fan that out additionally into this diagram here. So here we really go over, okay, what is the real problem the customer is trying to solve? What's the pain point? Things from MOEs would be measure of effectiveness. the KPPs, key performance parameters. Let's see, the measures of performance for the MOPs and the technical performance measures. All those things get blended in, and we're trying to bring back this importance to what is the life cycle, and then what are the needs. Because again, we've all, I know I've received, maybe you've also received just a document and say, okay, here are the requirements. We need to build something, and we need to meet these requirements. Okay, in the absence of context, okay, we can come up with something. We're creative individuals, but we just run the risk of the wrong rock without taking into account this. And for sometimes, the money is the money. Once we've spent the money and the time has passed, the system is the system. The customer either likes it or they don't. And sometimes there is no chance to redo. And the last thing we can afford these days is to have a lukewarm customer that, well, yeah, we kind of they did what we told them to do, but it's not like we're going to go back to it. So we want to avoid that situation. So, long story short, some front loading on some of these efforts can really make a much happier customer, and just the business case becomes clear. Once we get systems that just really hit it out of the park, hit the home run. Again, for each step here, there's validation steps. Okay, we validate the concepts and say, hey, are these your life cycle concepts? And from there, we can get needs, then validate the needs, ideally before we've even thought about the design. And as like before, sometimes there are organizational or program guidance documents on how to do these steps. So it's all one big ecosystem where a lot of items touch each other. Now that was a lot on some theory, some background, drives the documents. So knowing that will make going through these documents much easier. The first guide for managing requirements covers basically the first half. Needs elicitation, developing requirements, how to manage them, how to do verification. Again, that's more of a quality check on requirement statements, requirements verification, and that part of the effort. The guide to V&V picks up with verifying and validating the design that we have, calling it the design output specs. And then how do you do system V&V? We're setting up a test. We talk about reviews. Also, we have special cases. When to do early V&V. What if we're contracting out a lot of the verification and we're dependent on the vendor, completely for part data, and we're going to rest our acceptance on the part data. How do you do that? So, now, for the documents themselves, we're coming close to a draft release. The review copies of the guides and the manual, the needs and requirements lifecycle manual, they're out to the larger working group for review. And I know some people on this call are on that working group. If you're interested in taking a look at these, I'm more than happy to give you a copy. We love your input. The input's closing soon. I'm working on basically our draft for July. So we have a couple weeks left to hammer out our draft. They're really getting there. But we want to at the very least, have something either to release at July or to have a draft that is going to be submitted to the larger INCOSE body. They call it technical operations or tech ops, and have the tech ops draft submitted for their review. All right, to wrap this up, I'll go over a brief outline of what's in the V&V guide. Now, there's a similar presentation out there for the managing requirements. If you're interested in that, I can connect you with the draft there. But this will give a flavor for the V&V guide, and the other ones, the patterns are similar for the other documents. After an introduction, we lay out the design B&B process. So it's how to verify the design, and also validate the design, that if something was built to this, it would not only meet the requirements, but it would go back and satisfy the original needs. There's architecture. We mentioned early system B&B, how to validate the proposed set of system B&B artifacts. So before we launch an expensive B&B campaign, how do you validate that, okay, this is what the customer is expecting to see? A lot of times the customer wants us to save money. I believe most do. So they might push back if we have a too aggressive B&B scheme. They may want something more scaled down. So that conversation ideally happens before the money's committed and we've launched this large plan. Then no requirements management is complete without the attributes. So we talk about what attributes might be good to manage V&V. Now we move forward. We have a brief after design. We talk very briefly about production verification. In some institutions, this is handled by manufacturing quality assurance. But still, that's part of it. I mean, if we don't build it to print, at some level, all bets are off. So we mentioned that briefly. Then we go into V&V for realized pieces of hardware or software on that system V&V, system of interest, SOI. Again, how to plan it, how to define what it's going to be, and then how to execute it, and also how to validate it. So we have these artifacts, we'll have some tests, or do we validate that, okay, this was the right test. Some reporting. And then, and this is a feature of larger programs, not every program obviously is this large, but how do we do final system acceptance and approval? Okay, that's very much more the validation phase, operational testing in the environment. There's some thoughts on how to handle that. Again, attributes, and then maintenance. Then running down the last half of the guide, it's some proposed processes. So previously we discussed the principles. Then here is just some example processes. We have a process in the guide. It's basically there's a large table that just walks us through. Okay, what steps do we need to create a V&V plan? And it mentions some of the reviews that we might be familiar with. A conceptual review, a preliminary review, maybe and then a critical design review. So how do you blend that into this larger effort? Again, how to plan, execute, manage the results, and then for large systems, which some of us work on, there's some considerations there. Now, if verification is verifying that, okay, this realized piece of hardware, this meets a given requirement. Okay, the test data clearly satisfies this requirement. The system validation, and that's where you get into more, does this system meet the overall mission need? And that's what we're calling validation. And then it also has to be planned, executed. A lot of logistics there. I was working on earlier on in the career, before Sandia, we were developing a new way to manage a certain business process with ordering cryptographic key. This is a military environment. And for a validation, we had to install some software on our customers' operational servers. Okay? And I mean, you can imagine this is an active military command. The IT person is, responsible for keeping all the networks up and the adversaries out. So we had to do a lot of negotiation and get some. Obviously, our customer helped us, get into the server room, but we had to have an installation plan. We really had to, and how we would set up the software, and then also open different ports and do our testing, and then we close them again, and just how that would all be tested in an operational environment but that wouldn't mess up operations. So some early planning helped us out. It all worked. Obviously, we were very nice, because we were guests in their home, frankly. And then that key piece, though, when that worked, that was needed for final system acceptance and approval. And to my knowledge, they're still using that system to this day. So that's the system validation is more than just, getting some test plans and checking off requirements. So that's what we describe in 5. And then 6 and 7 are much shorter chapters regarding, how do we deal with commercial off-the-shelf elements. And then when we're really dependent on supplier-developed systems, okay, how do we do the verification? How much do we give the supplier in the contract? Maybe they don't need to know what the operational environment is, but then again, we run the risk of, do they give us the wrong rock? So we discuss those trade-offs. Now, so this describes the guide. Let's see, the internet's our friend here, actually, because we've got some YouTube videos that describe in far more detail some of this, the manual. Again, the manual, that's the larger document. There's a description on how integrated data comes back into play. And then what I'd recommend is is that first one. That first one goes into systems engineering, but just gives our take on how we do the systems engineering, the new vocabulary. That one would be worth watching. If you want more details on the V&V guide, the second one is there. The third one is just an overview of our working group. And much of this is from the last international workshop. Then you have other references there. For a deep dive into the larger picture, that fourth one, I think it's about a 2-hour video, that does cover soup to nuts, the whole manual, more than just V&V. Now, just to wrap it up, this original gap, which was a lack of tangible guidance that engineers, both advanced and also beginning, can look at, those documents are on the way, and it's down to months, not years. We're close. We were asked to create this documentation, and with about 1.5 years of work, it's coming to fruition. We had to balance, how do we get something that's complete and thorough, but also reasonably accessible? No one. Let's see. It's hard to persuade people to read a large manual cover to cover, and when they're cranking on a deadline and perhaps near the field. I'm not sure that's fair. Finally, this whole team behind this effort. We have 20+ contributors and reviewers. Some are still reviewing. Different document leads, and then the entire working group. I think we probably had 40 active members at the peak at the conferences. They've certainly helped us as well. I look forward to these documents. We're still taking feedback if you want to take a look at them, but there's some exciting products coming down the pipe. I hope you consider to check them out and give me feedback on them. So as a group, we're looking for that, but we're excited that a gap that's been around for a while is really going to close very soon. Robin or Arno, all yours. Although let me take some questions too. We've got a little time.
If you have any comments or remarks, please just unmute yourself now, and we'd love to just have a discussion. Thank you so much for that, Raymond.
Well, I'll start off with just a little story on some of the guide evolution here. This is back in late 2019, early 2020, and we're excited about these guides, and they just started growing, and it sort of told us the community might really have something to say. In fact, we had no intentions of writing a whole manual to describe all this, but it's just to capture what's been around the space. It has been pretty exciting. one question you might have would be, well, how does this relate to how do the guides relate to the handbook? Is there a disconnect there? And that's one of the roles that the tech ops community plays in INCOSE. These are people who have been in working groups. They will cross-check the manual's content with what's in the handbook. And not only that, but you may not know that a 5th edition of the handbook is in the works. So we're working on aligning our content with a revision that's not even out yet. So that once the new handbook hits the street, these guides will then be aligned. And just that cross-check is performed. Not that it all reads the same, but we want to identify any patent inconsistencies and then iron those out. So, other thoughts?
Hey, Raymond, this is Ann Hodges again. Bravo for emphasizing that verification and validation happens all throughout the life cycle. Thank you. I think, yeah,
Yes,
I guess
ma'am.
it's slide 21. Is that the one where you emphasize that? Yeah, far too often, and also emphasizing that you're doing verification and validation of different artifacts along the way, design, architecture, the manufacturing processes. I mean, right? So anyway, great job.
Well, that's, Ann, I'm glad you brought that up. That's where we think we could save projects a lot of money, because with the state of modeling tools out there is really top notch, in my opinion. I mean, we have some very sophisticated tools, and it's not let's see, Magic Draw, Genesis, but also other modeling tools, where if we can get in, matter of fact, if I go back to the V, if we can get on this mid left side and all of a sudden do a quick mock-up of the system simply based on requirements, and now all of a sudden we can find holes, we can find false requirements, we can even find interfaces that we're missing just by the act of trying to model what we're trying to build. And keep in mind, even in requirements development, we often play around with the physical allocation. We have a candidate physical, not a design, but a physical layout. Then we cross-check that with requirements. And then, are we missing a physical piece? Sometimes doing that shows us, turns out we do need a power system. Where are our power system requirements? Now we've closed that requirement gap. So the potential to really trim rework and just have a more pleasant engineering life experience, I think is really ripe here. And then any other thoughts? Okay, I'll jump in just with the share final word. The concepts here, I don't think many of them will be new. Perhaps doing a quality check on requirements, how we use certain terms might look a little new, but if looked at in the larger picture, then every term has its place, and I think you'll find that this gives a complete or a near complete view of how to really do systems engineering, taking into account as much as possible. Anything from a life cycle concept down to how do you do a quality check on a design? Was the design done correctly? Is there, for instance, there could be a policy of, for design, we have a rule, it's 5% margin to requirements across the board. Just proposing that. Well, verifying the design would be verifying that the design verily meets this 5% margin. And when you say design verification, sometimes that's not what came into my mind at first. So I had to really sit with this and understand the new vocabulary. But But I don't think this leaves very little off the plate. I think it catches most of it. If it's missing something, let us know right away. We want to put it in. But again, I think saving rework, reducing the number of prototype builds needed, saving software headaches. I think the potential's here, and I'm excited about this. Thanks. Let me turn back to Ann and Robin.
Thank you, Raymond. I appreciate every one of you coming today. I did post the survey link in the chat bar, and we would appreciate it if you would take a moment to fill that out. And again, Raymond, thanks for spending your time and sharing your expertise this evening. It was very interesting, and I think you did such a great job of covering the concepts that we didn't have very many questions. So excellent, excellent job. And we'll end just a little bit early and wish everyone a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raymond. Yay.
No, thanks. I'll stay on the call if anyone has some follow-up. So
Okay.
thank you for the opportunity. International Symposium. There'll be another